Shabbat Shalom. A couple of weeks ago, my wife and I, the whole family, but it was a sort of joint Hanukkah birthday present to us that we got a fireplace insert built into our fireplace. And it turns out hopefully it might be a really good thing to have done in this week. But it's like they build right into your fireplace sort of an oven with a wall that you can shut, a door you can shut so that the kids don't, get in the fire. Okay, whatever. It's a fireplace. But they come into your house and actually have to build it there. And so a nice man named Chris said, I'm going to build the first fire for you here just to make sure it works and it's, whatever horrible, I don't know, could happen. So Chris sits down and he starts building a fire. And he's showing me, and my brother-in-law was there, all the different things about this as we're sort of sitting and watching the fire. And his voice starts to get a little lower and lower. And we sat there watching this fire with him telling us different stories about things people had done in their fireplace inserts, right? By way of teaching us what we should and shouldn't do. And at a certain point, he kind of trailed off and was watching the fire, and my brother-in-law said, well, one time and then he told some story about a time when he and his friends had, I don't remember it right now, and then I kind of jumped in and said, oh, actually that happened to me once. And we turned in the course of about 5 minutes from this sort of transaction of purchasing a thing and then having it set up and to basically where humans have been for thousands and thousands of years, right? Three people just sitting around a fire and telling each other stories. And we were there for quite some time, actually, until he said, well, I should probably go to the next job. Okay, bye, Chris. But the act of telling a story is deeply, deeply primal. It is innate in who we are. It is ground into every cell in our DNA, is this appreciation of speaking, not just to one another, but telling stories to one another. And I am someone who absolutely loves stories. When I was a Rosh Hashanah at Ramah, a unit head, the kids put on a skit making fun of all of the staff, right? And the camper who played Ethan opened every statement he made with, I want to tell you a story about another story within a story by a means of a story. That's how I was seen, and I couldn't have been prouder of the way I came across. And that is something that goes back to the Parsha that we read today. Because in the Parsha that we read today, we get a commandment to tell a story. Moses is talking to the people. God says to them, right, that he got it to Levincha, b'yom hahu, right, we're talking about Pesach, but on that day, you will tell, Haggadah, you will tell your child on that day, ba'avor zeh, because of this and what God did for me as I got out of Egypt, etc., etc. And the commentaries in this moment almost all agree that this is one of the rare times where the Torah is breaking the fourth wall. It's not Moses saying to just the people around him that you have to tell your children. It's actually a commandment on all of us, every person who's reading, to tell this story to their children. And it's a commandment that we in many ways fulfill, of course, with the Haggadah, right, to tell this story. But very early on, the rabbis understand this is not about information, telling this story. Maimonides even codifies that if you're at a Seder and there's like 3 rabbis sitting around a Seder, that's going to be a long Seder, but if it's only rabbis, right, you would think you don't have to tell the story of Pesach, right? Everybody here knows the story of Pesach, but Maimonides says even in that moment, they have to tell it to each other, the rabbis. Because the mitzvah, the commandment, the thing that is so important is the telling of this story. So why is telling a story an important thing to do? What is it about this act that's a mitzvah, that's so important? Well, there's different, obviously, rabbinic thoughts on that matter. One of our commentaries, Chizkiah ben Manoach, Chizkuni, says that the reason why you have to tell the story, it says, Higata levincha, tell it to your children, even if they don't ask. Because, right, we know that children are supposed to ask questions, 4 of them, etc., right? But even if they don't ask, they're going to want to hear a story, says Chizkuni. And so a story is a way of getting information across or getting someone's attention, even if they don't want to be listening. Why do you think I started everything I said at Camp Ramah with a story? Because no one wanted to listen to the Rosh Hashanah, but maybe if I had a funny story, they would. A later commentary, Or HaChaim, says, no, higadata is actually a very important word. Because there's another word, if it just meant to tell, to talk, we have a word for that in Hebrew, just basic talking, 100 million bonus points. It's, yes, is the right answer. Nice job, everybody. Right? It is lemor, right? To speak or to just say. But Moses doesn't say lemor, levincha, speak to yourself. Hagadata. So what does that mean? So Or HaChaim says a Haggadah, that kind of telling, is both the good and the bad. And what Moses is commanding here is saying, you in the future, you might think we're going to tell this story to our children, but only all the great parts. You know, only the good stuff. We're cutting out all of the bad. We don't want to hear about all the times the Israelites disobeyed, golden what, golden nothing, right? We leave all of that stuff out. We just tell the good parts. But this one word says absolutely not. You have to share the good as well as the bad. And then finally, Amek Davar, our last commentary I'm going to quote, I promise, flips it. And he says it has nothing to do with the person hearing the story at all. He says that the whole point of this commandment to tell the story is that while you are talking, he says, the words of the speaker on their lips, itosev lekach ha'emunah balev, right? That they will be given even more faith in their hearts as they tell the story. The act of creating a story, says Hamek Davar, is important. Why? Well, we have to think about what parts do we want to share, the good and the bad. We have to think about how am I going to tell this to this audience? Will it be received? Will it not be received? You remember things when you're telling a story that you don't remember. I can't tell you how many times in my life I've been sitting with a group of people, sometimes after a loss, sometimes just for fun, and they start telling, Safta stories. They start telling Bubby stories. And then all of a sudden they say, wait, remember that one? No, but there was, and then there's the fight, right? No, was it in Minsk or was it in Pinsk or was it 10 or was it 11? But through that, we're refining what's important about the narrative. What do we want to make sure people get? And this command, which seems kind of easy, and we have a whole book, it's called the Haggadah, you do it every year, and it's for the kids, and this, I think, is one of the most important mitzvot for our day today that we all need. Because there are a lot of stories out there to be told, and there's a lot of stories in this room, and we aren't always so good at sharing them. Sometimes we are, and we have friends who speak entirely in stories, right? Some of my best friends, right? Everything is, one time. That's amazing, and that's good, right? This is a bet from my wife of whether or not I would share this or not. There's a Star Trek episode where I know, sorry, I'm not cool. Guests, I apologize. There's a Star Trek episode where there's an entire race that only speaks to each other in stories. I know a few of you know what I'm talking about. You don't have to nod and give yourselves away. But one could communicate, right? And one could communicate, in fact, I think even better, because the story has so much wrapped up in it. It's got different emotions, it's got different moments, it's got different expectations, all that could be shared with one snippet of one moment. To our executive director earlier this week, something happened, it's not important what. And I used 3 words from a West Wing episode to convey an entire conversation that he got just because of those 3 words, and we moved on. Stories are incredibly important, and they're important for us to make sure that ours is known, and known to not only us, but our children. I don't know what my kids know about my life. They probably know the basics. I don't think I've done a good job of teaching them the story I tell about myself, where I come from and who I am and what I want. And I need to make sure that they understand that. And our friends and our loved ones, to say nothing of the people who don't know us and our people, they need to know our story. And we need to listen to the stories of others. Facts are facts, and we can disagree about facts, and we should, but you can't disagree with someone's story. And if I want to know you, I need to know what your story is. And I need to know the stories that you tell about yourself, and I need to maybe even know the stories you think you know about me, right? And that process of listening and telling is the only way that we can find a way to all sit around the same campfire eventually. And stories can be our salvation because it's how we pass on our heritage and who we are. No, I'm going to leave you with something that's so trite, you're going to be like, oh, we knew this was coming. We all saw it coming. It's an old Hasidic story. And I heard that laugh over here. It's an old Hasidic story that the Baal Shem Tov, the spiritual founder of the Hasidic movement, when the people of Israel were threatened, he would go to a special place in the woods, and he would light a special candle, and he would say a special prayer, and God would hear his prayer and save the people of Israel. And then the next generation came along, his student, the Maggid of Mezrich. Again, the Jewish people are threatened, but he's lost the ability to make this magical candle. He knew where the spot was in the woods because he went and followed the Baal Shem Tov once. So when there was a threat to the people, he goes to the woods and he says the prayer because he heard that, but he doesn't have the candle, and God says, that's good enough. And the Jewish people are saved. And then one of his disciples, the Ruzhner Rebbe, he didn't know where the woods was because he didn't follow him out there that one time. But the Maggid, his teacher, told him the prayer. So when the Jewish people were threatened, he didn't know where the candle was and he didn't know where the woods was, but he knew the special prayer, and he said that, and God held the people and saved the people. And then his student, the seer of Lublin, the Chozeh of Lublin, same thing happens. In his day, the Jewish people are threatened, and he looks at God and he says, I don't know this candle, and I don't know where the spot is the woods, and I've lost the prayer also, but I do know the story of those things, and I promise to tell it. And God held that was enough, and the Jewish people were saved. And because I can't leave it at that, that story itself gets told again and again and again and again. And one of my teachers traced it. It starts with a Rebbe named Zach, and then it goes to Martin Buber and Shai Agnon, and everybody tells that story. And do they tell it exactly the same? No, of course they don't. They change it, and they make it their own, because that's the other thing that we do with stories. We change them and they make them ours. So how do we pass on this tradition, this ancient tradition that must be passed on? We have to tell the stories. How do we understand the people around us better? We have to tell them our stories and listen to theirs. How do we think about the future? A world where we might not know the place, and we might not know some of the special rituals, and we might even lose some of the prayers. If we keep telling those stories and passing them on, we keep bringing people into the narrative so that they are part of something larger than themselves in the way that we are a part of something larger than ourselves. And hopefully that storytelling will be what keeps our people safe and keeps our people going. Shabbat Shalom.